I call to order the meeting of the Lake Mills Plan Commission of February 25th, 2020. We'll proceed with roll call.
Mr. Foster?
Here.
Mr. Holman?
Here.
Mr. Schumacher?
Here.
Mr. Coots?
Here.
Ms. Lazaris?
Here.
And Mr. Magnuson and Mr. Grady previously informed staff that they'd be unavailable this evening.
All right, thank you. Item number 3, corrections and/or approval of the minutes of December 10, 2019.
I move adoption of the minutes of December 10th, 2019 as written.
Second.
Moved and seconded to approve the minutes of December 10. Any discussion? In that case, I'll proceed with a roll call vote.
Mr. Holman?
Aye.
Mr. Schumacher?
Aye.
Mr. Coots?
Aye.
Ms. Lazaris?
Aye.
Mr. Foster?
Aye.
Motion passed 5-0.
Item number 4, questions and public comment. The public may address the commission at this time regarding items on the agenda unless the item is the subject of a public hearing. If your comments pertain to a public hearing, please hold your comments until the hearing. We do have one public hearing this evening, item number 5, rezoning request by Gremar LLC on behalf of C&S Untz Trust to change zoning of Parcel 246-0713-2423003 east of Mud Lake Road and south of the Glacial Drumlin Trail from Rural Development RD to single-family residential R14 for 15.36 acres and to single-family residential R16 for 4.55 acres. Public comment may also be made at this time on items that are not on the agenda if you have registered with the city clerk before the meeting. The state's open meeting law discourages action by the commission on items not listed on the agenda. Please keep your comments limited to 3 minutes. State your name and address when starting your comments, and also fill out the sign-in sheet at the podium. Are there any public comments at this time? Does anyone wish to comment under item number 4? In that case, we'll go on to item number 5, public hearing. The zoning amendment request by Gremar LLC on behalf of property owner C&S Untz Trust for the purpose of changing the zoning of parcel 246-0713-2423003, 19.91 acres from rural development RD to 15.36 acres single-family residential R14 and 4.5 acres 4.55 acres to single-family residential R16. Before we open the public hearing, I'd like to begin with the report from our consulting planner, Dustin Wolf.
Thank you. Everybody should have the memo that we put together. It's also available online in case anybody's looking for it. As you indicated, this is an approximately 20-acre site immediately east of Mud Lake Road to the south of Highway 89. The property was recently annexed. I can't remember when it was finalized. Fall. The rezoning petition also accompanies a preliminary plat that was submitted and now a final plat tonight. The property will have 2 zonings on it, which is the R14 and the R1-6. So those are single-family districts that allow differing lot sizes. Much of the area down here is agricultural with some, we'll say, sort of rural residential, a handful of farmhouse properties, and then some previously developed industrial properties in the area. The findings that we have, which is outlined in the zoning code, but we highlight here, focuses on, does the proposed map amendment further the purpose of the zoning code When we bring properties in an annexation, we generally bring them in our RD district, our rural development district, which is an extremely low-density district that allows typically for agricultural activities to occur. It doesn't really allow for any other developments to happen. You're allowed one dwelling unit per 35 acres. It is really a holding district when lands like this come into the community. So then a rezoning petition is typically shortly follows the annexation itself, and that's the case here. The districts that are proposed encourages single-family development consistent with the future plan use that we have for that property. Does this amendment maintain the desired consistency of land uses and land use intensities in that area? Staff would state yes. There are residences down there. There are some small industrial operations, but predominantly this is an area that is agricultural, that is intended to be served by public utilities with the extension of 89 and those improvements. Ultimately, improvements on Mud Lake Road, this will also be served by public utilities. The proposed development that's encouraged in that area, that companies of Plat will have stormwater management facilities included. We'll talk, I know, in more detail, separate item, but the benefit will be that there are some stormwater issues in that area, and this will hopefully address them. Does the proposed map amendments, are they in conformance with the comprehensive plan? The comp plan calls for this area to be our planned neighborhood land use category. That is a category for larger areas, not specific tracts themselves, large areas to have a variety of zoning types on them to accommodate a variety of development types. Specifically a breakdown predominantly of single family, and it could be any of our three different single-family zoning districts, the R14, R16, or R18. In this case, it's the 4 and the 6, I guess for people who may be watching this later. The 4 and the 6 indicate units per acre. The proposed rezoning here would have the R16 properties generally adjacent to Mud Lake Road, so a little bit narrower properties, a little bit smaller in size, and then larger properties as you get to the interior of what would be the kind of easterly portion of the proposed development site. The planned neighborhood district allows for parks to be included. It could have small neighborhood type commercial. None of that is proposed in this case here, but it is intended to have a variety of housing types, could include two-family or multifamily. Again, not proposed with this, but that's a larger land use category for future development of an area. The idea is that the future development could accommodate a variety of housing types so people can find the housing product they're looking for within a geographic area instead of having to crisscross the community to find the product that they're looking for, whether they are a renter, first-time home buyer, someone buying up second, third home, or people trying to empty nesters or older persons who want to have a smaller home but don't want to, again, have to move to a different part of the community, want to stay in a neighborhood setting. That is the intention here. So the proposed zoning that we have before us tonight does comply with the goals and the priorities of the comprehensive plan in the eyes of staff. It also asks about the trend of development in this area. There really hasn't been a trend of development in this area. There were no utilities down here. As I said, with the completion of the 89 project, we'll have utilities, and the city has been planning for development in this area for a couple decades. So we are kind of at that point now where there will be utilities readily available. The expectation is that landowners and or developers are going to be coming to the city to rezone or develop properties into some higher and better use in conformance with our long-range plans. Staff is supportive, and there is a resolution to that effect.
All right, thank you, Mr. Wolf. We are in public hearing. Is there anyone who wishes to comment on the public hearing concerning the proposed rezoning of this 19-some acres? Would anyone like to comment on this proposed rezoning?
Hello, my name is Trent Topol. We own the property adjacent to Mud Lake Road, and are you going to be addressing the stormwater issue tonight?
Slightly.
Okay. I guess that was one of my concerns, and also the restructuring of Mud Lake Road. So I was wondering if you were going to touch on either one of those tonight.
We can slightly. You'd be better off coming in and sitting down with us and going over it. But this unit doesn't actually look at those parts of it, but we can discuss some of it. But that'll be as part of the development.
Okay. Because my concern is mainly the environmental impact it's going to have on that end of town, so, with the stormwater. Because we're affected already from that area that you're now looking at. Everything runs downhill, and then it floods our, across the road out, because it has a culvert at that time. Right now it actually does. It goes across the road and floods us out. So I was wondering how that is going to be addressed.
We actually have gone through a pretty substantial study.
Okay?
There's a detention basin and and then there's a second basin where the water goes and is supposed to infiltrate.
Okay.
And that hits up to a certain storm level, I believe it's the 100-year storm level.
Yeah.
It then overflows to the northeast.
Yeah, the northeast is where the flooding is occurring now, but it's also a culvert that comes across the street about 150 feet shy of that, so.
Right. So you're talking about, what we're looking at is if it backs up to a level of 894, it would back up, it has to back up through the whole system.
Okay.
And then it actually has to fill up some of the pipes, and then it backs up and backs into an outlet that runs into that ditch.
Mhm.
But that's south of your driveway, almost to the
Right.
property line on the south edge.
Correct.
There is some stormwater drainage in the intersection of Mud Lake Road, and we propose to run pipes down along and
Okay.
under the roadway. Probably the most substantial area there for you is as that road rises,
Correct.
we have to slope down to your existing driveway. That water runs down to that driveway, and then that's all piped out to the
Okay.
south end.
Okay, well, that's what my question was. Thank you.
Yep. Yeah, there will be no longer a cross culvert. It'll all be curb and gutter, and all that piping will be typical storm sewer type.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Topol. We are still in public hearing. Is there anyone else who wishes to comment on this proposed rezoning? Are there any further comments on this proposal? All right, in that case, I'll close the public hearing. We go on to item number 6, discussion recommendation on zoning amendment request, Gremar LLC, on behalf of property owner C&S Untz Trust, for the purpose of changing the zoning of parcel 2460713, 2423 19.91 acres from rural development RD to 15.36 acres, single-family residential R14, and 4.55 acres, single-family residential R16. Plan commissioners, we do have a prepared motion concerning this request. This is motion 22-1, recommendation to City Council for zoning amendment, parcel 2460713, 2423 Tyranena Point Subdivision, Gremar Development. This motion sets forth the city's zoning authority under Wisconsin state statutes, that the city has request certain requirements for the zoning amendments. The rezoning that is requested, the review by city staff, tonight's public hearing, and Plan Commission review. The motion does provide for Plan Commission recommendation to the City Council to approve the rezoning request subject to provisional procedural provisions in the city zoning ordinance and requirements noted in the planner's memo. So that is motion 22-1. Plan Commissioners, do you have any questions or comments about the requested rezoning? Any further observations from staff?
No, not at this time.
No, I believe that it's consistent with all the planning that we've done for the last 20 years. It's consistent with a comprehensive plan. It's pretty much consistent with everything we've done to date, so I'm not surprised that this is what it is. I think I'm a little surprised at how big that hill was. So, it required some planning changes, but other than that, it's pretty much down the line of what we were looking at as far as considering zoning and those types.
All right, very well. Is there anyone who wishes to make a motion concerning motion 22-1?
I'll make a motion of adoption of motion 20-2-1.
Second.
All right, it's been moved and seconded to adopt motion 22-1. Any further discussion? All right, hearing none, I'll proceed with a roll call vote.
Mr. Schumacher?
Aye.
Mr. Coots?
Aye.
Ms. Lazares?
Aye.
Mr. Foster?
Aye.
Mr. Holman?
Aye.
Motion passed 5-0.
We go on with item number 7, discussion recommendation on final plat, Tyranena Point Subdivision Parcel 2460713, 2423003. And I would like to start off with comments by our consulting planner, Dustin Wolf.
The preliminary plat for this project came before you last month, 2 months ago,
What?
excuse me, December. At that time, they were looking at doing just all R14, so it was 42 lots. And working with the staff, we wanted to see some variety of lot sizes. That's where the R16 came in along Mud Lake Road. So the final plat is now 43 lots, which doesn't sound like much, but it's helpful for projects down here. There are 3 outlots proposed here. The city's assistant public works director, can I remember his title, is here to answer some questions. But outlot 3, which is the northernmost part of the site, is slated for stormwater management. It's about a 3 acre, somewhere around 3 acres for stormwater management. Also has some wetlands on there. I'll let him comment on that in a minute. Mud Lake Road is proposed to be rebuilt, reconstructed as a part of this, and then utilities will be run down Mud Lake Road and ultimately into the development itself. As we discussed under the public hearing, this proposal does comply with the long-range plans for the community, the things that we thought were going to happen as a result of the reconstruction of Highway 89 and the extension of those utilities is coming to fruition here. So it's certainly good to see that. I'd like to make sure that it's clear that the R14 properties, so the interior of the site, the bulk of the site, 15 odd acres, those have an 80-foot width and 10,000, minimum size of 10,000 square feet, so a quarter of an acre. The R16 are a little bit smaller. They're about 60 feet wide, and they have a lot size of about 7,200 square feet. The key there is it provides for a variety of housing product at a variety of housing price points, which is going to be important in this community. The developer anecdotally seemed excited at this opportunity to have different products for different parts of the market. The lots, though, the R16 lots, are larger than 60 feet in width. They're generally around 70 feet. There's a couple that are like 67 or 68, but generally they're 70 to 80 feet in width anyway, so they certainly are much larger than that 60-foot width. The outlots 1 and 2 are reserved for future residential development when they can be effectively served by sewer, and there's some grading that would have to occur if you've been on the site. There's a kind of a big ridge and such. So those will ultimately be developed, we expect. There will be multiple accesses to Mud Lake Road for obviously the R16 properties, but there will be 2 other connections for internal roadways connecting to Mud Lake Road. Ultimately, there will be more development eastward of this that connects over to Highway 89. All of the development will have sidewalks, which is important. I can let Dwayne talk about any of the road or stormwater issues if you'd like to hear from them. Our recommendation, of course, is approval, just conditioned upon the rezoning which just occurred, and that a future park site will be reserved in a future phase. Any technical corrections? So I don't know, Dwayne, want to talk about any, if there's anything specific you wanted to hear
Well,
about?
As far as roadways, they're 34 feet back of curb to back of curb, which is our standard local street. And that's what they'll use within the subdivision. The stormwater has a holding pond, and then where there is actually water, like our wet basins, and then that'll dump into another pond, which is to the east, which is an infiltration pond, and the calculations are that should allow enough water to penetrate up to a 100-year storm without having to spill out anywhere. And that's even in frozen ground conditions. You have to, I shouldn't say it's even, but it's pretty substantial. The ground can be frozen and it'll still take a lot of water before it'll start to back up. It actually spills to the northeast, which is a wetlands, which is also where the state highway dumps their stormwater. I'm not quite sure how they're going to back theirs up. I assume what will happen is we have a stormwater system that runs all the way down to the end of Mud Lake Road, consistent with all our standard development. There's a storm pipe that runs down it and all the way to the south end, and then there are inlets every so far, and we let the water in, and then it comes and it turns and heads into the first wet basin and then dumps into the infiltration basin. If it backs up over that one level, which is generally over a 100-year storm, it starts to back up in the pipes, and then it spills out of a pipe onto the west side of.
Is there a button we need to push?
Oh, no, he can't, because Dustin's got it. Can you?
Go plug that in? I have to go plug it in.
Oh, no, forget it. Anyways, it's right there at the, I can't. Camera isn't working, we had to, I wish I could. But it's right there at that Tyranena Point Road where it ties into Mud Lake Road. There's a area that if it backs up far enough, it'll spill out of the back of that inlet and into the ditch on the west side of Mud Lake Road. It then runs to the southwest towards the wetlands out there by the park, Sand Hill Campground, in that area back there. So this is all south of the area that's generally a problem with Trent's. At Trent's driveway, because of the raising of the street, there's going to be a sloping down, so we had to put some plumbing in that would capture all the water in the northwest area there and drain it under his driveway and then out essentially to the south end of the property there, where then it starts running across Bob Topol's property to the southwest, which is where it runs now. Like he said, it backs up under that culvert and then out, and then it runs down that direction. You'll probably actually get less backup in the future than you do now under these development scenarios, but with as many 100-year storms as we've been getting, it's going to happen probably once every 3 years. Apparently 100-year storms just aren't what they used to be. The sanitary sewer and the water are all constructed to city standards, so if you go to our standard specifications, it's going to come out according to those standard specs. So it's ductile iron water main, 8 inches or bigger, copper 1-inch services, certain buffalo boxes, fire hydrants every so often.
Does the sanitary gravity, or does it got to be lifted?
No, it's all gravity.
Oh.
The advantage we had was, and that's why when I talk about, we've been planning for this for 20 years, Dwayne, back in 2000, was already laying the groundwork for how we were going to split East Lake Street and Water Street to divide the north side from the south side of the city. So all the sanitary sewer that essentially is on the north side of the city drains into North Main Street and then into Lake Street and down to the wastewater plant, and everything on the south side runs down Water Street, and then it runs all the way down. And that gave us the opportunity to drop the depth. So when you saw how deep the sanitary sewer was getting cut here, that was part of the reason we did that, was so we could keep that sanitary sewer deep enough so that when we got out there, Mud Lake Road and County Highway A come together right there just south of 89, Mud Lake Road takes a drop and then it rises back up. So that portion of Mud Lake Road has to be raised in order to put it on cover, because the sewer is going to be about coming out of the ground there. But as you get further to the south, then the ground comes up again, that it's running pretty much at grade. And then up the hill isn't a problem. It'll be coming down off that ridge pretty fast towards Mud Lake Road. Sanitary sewer, stormwater are all going to move. In fact, Mud Lake Road's storm system is separate from the subdivisions. The subdivision will all flow down here and actually come between these lots into that basin. Mud Lake Road all flows down this way and then into the basin here. And like I said, this is where that point is, where it backs up and comes out and flows down this way. The area that Trent's concerned about is right here, and we're putting some stormwater piping along the back of the right away there to drain that off and get it down to here. So, it's our standard design, but we have a lot of expectations in our development codes. It's pretty high standard. Yeah, we did a lot of work on the emergency outlet. The developer, his engineer, submitted a pretty substantial report, which I think was on the Public Works Board docket. So if you wanted to read it, it's on the Public Works Board agenda. And it went over all the scenarios for the stormwater, and he met all the requirements. We then said, well, we need to see something else. So Dwayne and Mike and Brandon came up with this concept here of pushing it down, backing it up to a certain point, then allowing it to kind of run out the back, and where it essentially does now, because that's what the culverts that like Trent said does now. It allows it to back up and come under the road and down. So, but we've shifted a little bit further, because with the grade of the road, we didn't want to get it. He's already got some low areas there, and we're trying to get that all over to a couple inlets and then shift it down. We were trying to cover all those bases, make sure that we didn't create anything worse than what's already there. So we spent a lot of time working on that, probably 4 hours. Some of the water and sewer stuff is more standard, so it's not, you don't really have to think about it. In this case, we're following the new rules, so the water is on one side of the street and sewer's on the other. So you don't see the manholes in the middle of the street, you see them in the curves of the intersections. Storm sewer will still be in the middle because it had to be, but
Are the water mains under the sidewalks on? Or-
they're between the sidewalk and the curb.
Good idea.
The reason for that is to try and cut down on digging a pavement
Yeah,
while we're
wrecking the road.
fixing a leak.
I think what to be noted there, the property owner won't notice it, except you won't see trees planted between the curb and the sidewalk. It'll be on the house side of the sidewalk, and there'll be
In
an
an easement.
Yeah.
Which is how the code set it up now. You guys made that change, I think, in 2014. And we will have a developer's agreement, a standard with all developments, and, they have to pay for tree plantings, they have to pay a park fee, they have to agree to certain types of conditions that, in this case particularly, because they are involved in a TID, they'll have more conditions placed on them for what's expected.
All right, very well, thank you. Are there any other comments, questions concerning the proposed final plat?
One of the recommendations in the memo was a future park site to be reserved for a future phase. Do we have any thoughts where that might fall?
We do,
Is
we
that-
don't want to discuss that right now?
There are sites that we were looking at, but the topography is such that it really wouldn't be super usable. And we are trying to look at it to make it clear for a future phase that we need to look at it with then a next phase from there. So try to package it with the next couple developments that are expected to come.
So that's not the C1 that's listed on the new outdoor recreational plan.
No, and that's a community level park, so that would be a Wallace size park. We would be looking for one of the N1 or N2s here for one of the
Gotcha.
neighborhood parks.
Okay.
Ultimately, something that will be central to the whole development of that area. But it's really supposed to serve, I'll just say, kind of between Mud Lake Road and 89. Especially as you start going south.
And I was pleased to see that we had the R16 in there, because I know the last time we talked with the developer, it was going to be 350,000 and higher houses, so I'm hoping that we'll break that barrier and go a lot lower for some folks that might not be as well in
Yeah, it's hard to say how much lower it will be, but again, the cost of land is reduced. It means you get more lots on that frontage, which brings down your cost per
Yeah.
lot of providing services to it. I can't say that, I certainly wouldn't call them, low moderate income housing. It's a lower price point opportunity within the development.
Yeah, no, well, that's a good thing, especially since we're trying to bring businesses in. Excuse me, can't talk tonight. And I know we've talked about it in the past. Is there anything in the final plat here that talks about the secondary routes for water, sewer, and things like that?
Secondary road,
As far as having two
Looping?
having two paths in there?
what we've historically done is that this number of lots, we don't require that. If they went to the 65 lots, then we would require it. So the way that we've worked it out with them, and we've required them to submit a regional drawing that shows how it would continue to develop.
Yeah.
And if that occurred, it would run down to Highway 89.
Yep.
And then loop across to St. Paul's.
Okay. All right, just so I just want to make sure we had a plan for that. Obviously, we don't want them to be out there in an island in case they get cut off.
More concerned about the elevations and the water pressures than I am about the ultimate connections. We've had areas that have been on long strings before. In fact, the whole city was for the first 15 years I was here.
Yeah.
So the real issue is there a way to make the connections work? And if we have houses that have poor water pressure, they're not going to the developer to complain, they're coming to us, so.
I just would hate to see something happen and water get cut off and then there's a fire emergency and we can't plug into hydrants and we're trucking water in and things of that nature. So that's why I'm bringing this up, to make sure we've thought about it.
We, we have loops relatively close, so Sandy Beach Road loops up Ferry, runs down to the park and then runs up Ferry to, so there's a loop there. So even if they had to hook up and run from there like they do for the more rural areas, they would have the capacity. I mean, we're used to fighting rural fires too. In this case, it
Sure.
would be a little bit different. I mean, it would have to take an unusual situation, but it happens.
Yeah.
But they have alternate methods to deal with it. And ultimately, if this develops out, then you have the loop that runs down around. And then the other side ties into St. Paul's, which runs up through the school property and ties in at Fairview Court.
And currently, the way it's set up here, it doesn't go out anywhere except Mud Lake Road right now.
Right now.
Until future.
This road here would ultimately come back around and end up coming out to Untz Haven Road right there
Untz
at St.
Haven, right.
Paul's, which is then where the water is. And they already have to connect there to get to the sewer, because at the top of this ridge, they're not gonna bring that sewer back this way. They're gonna run that sewer the other way, which then has to go down to the manhole at St. Paul's.
Yeah, no, I'm just thinking there's no other way to get into that housing area if something happened at the one end of Mud Lake Road,
At this
at
point,
least at this point.
it's so small though at this point.
But you have two accesses. You have this one here and this one here, which is generally our
Right.
minimum.
Well, I'm saying if something happened right at the beginning of Mud Lake Road,
The far northern portion.
what's that?
Far north, right, you'd have to
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
reroute from the south, right.
Yeah, there'd have to be a way to reroute and get them in there if something was going on, emergency, medical emergency, whatever the case is. Like we had the part of the road shut down just earlier last week up by 94, stuff happens, so.
Yeah, I sat in that.
At least you went into ground.
That's all I had, I'm sorry.
No,
Takes so much time.
that's fine, that's fine. These are good questions. Now, has the Public Works Board reviewed this, and what did they have to say?
They recommended it with some conditions that they work on with the staff for final council approval, which is the real last issue is from a public works standpoint is the water pressure.
All right.
And there's, they meet the minimum standards, the minimum DNR standards. The question is, does the city have to accept the minimum DNR standards? I say no. I think they might argue different, but my interpretation of the law has always been, we couldn't go lower than but we can be higher. So we couldn't say, well, you can go down to 15 pounds, but we can say you have to be at 40. So that's probably a conversation we'll still have to have, and obviously, we're not going to do anything until there's a final signed developers agreement, which is a condition of all of them, so.
All right, very well. Are there any further comments, questions? Plan Commission, we have a prepared motion 22-2, final plat approval, Tyranena Point Phase 1 subdivision. This motion does set forth the city's subdivision authority under Wisconsin state statutes. The final plat request for Tyranena Point Phase 1, review by city staff, prior preliminary plat approval, Public Works Board review, Plan Commission review. This motion provides for a Plan Commission recommendation to the City Council of final plat approval, subject to submission of supporting documentation, including staff approval of engineering plans, 2, staff approval of the engineer's cost estimate, 3, staff approval of the subdivision covenants, 4, approval of requested rezoning, 5, financial guarantee, 6, the final plat must meet all requirements of the ordinance as noted and the planners and engineers memos. Now, in the planner's memo, the conditions listed here, the R14 and R16 rezoning, 2, the future park site to be reserved in a future phase, 3, technical corrections required by the engineer. And also, this resolution states that in the event any outside agency review is not completed or all supporting documents not submitted in final form within 120 days required by the city, the approvals recommended herein would be null and void. This is the motion recommending approval of the final plat. Is there any discussion? Oh, Mr. Wolf,
Yes.
you have something you want to?
No, I'm just preparing for the next agenda item.
Very good, very good. Okay, all right, fine. All right, any further discussion on this or a motion?
I'll move to accept as presented.
So-
Been moved and seconded to pass motion 22-2. Any further discussion? In that case, we'll proceed with the roll call vote.
Mr. Coots?
Aye.
Ms. Lazarus?
Aye.
Mr. Foster?
Aye.
Mr. Holman?
Aye.
Mr. Schumacher? Motion passed 5-0.
And now we have item number 8, discussion recommendation on 2020 to 2025 comprehensive outdoor recreation plan, and we begin with Mr. Wolf.
Thank you. It's that time again. Every few years, obviously, we update our comprehensive outdoor recreation plan, or CORP. I have done, I think, 3 of these with you now, and there are a few that predated me. All of this is available online. I want to make sure that's clear to everybody, including the entire plan document. The city staff worked diligently with the Parks and Recreation Board on these items. It is, of course, an update from previous plans, but there are always some new things that get added. Some of the questions that seem to arise, and I am going to be hitting the high points, so if you need me to go into detail on something, do not hesitate to ask, but remember, you're talking about a document that's 100-odd pages and has a lot of minutia, obviously, as it relates to park and recreation planning in the community. So why are we updating this plan? Well, of course, just to have a long-range plan to ensure that we kind of know where we're going as a community, as it relates to these important public facilities and amenities. We're going to talk about what's happened since the last one, some of the key changes, goals for the next 5 years, and then the impact fee study. But most notably, why are we updating this is under statutes and DNR rules, if you want to be eligible for grant monies, you need to have a current plan document. It needs to have gone through this public review process. It needs to be clear with goals and objectives and policies and growth, understanding of your existing and future growth, and to have new plan amenities outlined within them. We did provide this to the DNR. They do kind of accept the documents, and then they keep them on file. And if you go after some sort of DNR funding, and you do not have a current plan or something's not in your plan that you are going after funding for, you will not be eligible. Now, it doesn't mean you can't amend your plan, but we try to nip this in the bud early on. The plan is a 5-year plan, just because things change pretty quickly in certain instances with development and some of the opportunities available to us. So what was completed from the last plan? A lot of Wallace Park things have been completed since the last plan. Steve just indicated to me that we're going to be making a slight change. The school district has said instead of earmarking a softball field over there, they'd like to see a baseball field. I'm looking for a head nod to make sure I got that correct. So we will update. This is just a graphic, obviously, in the plan document, but we will be updating that to make sure that that reflects. Now, that doesn't mean everything in here has been constructed. I don't want you to take it that way, but you've worked on a lot of things since the last plan was completed as it relates to Wells Park. There are still things that are always going to be earmarked in the plan that you may not have entirely finished, but they are elements that have been programmed for a park. Splash pad, in this case, kind of jumps out at you. Those were items that were intended to be fundraised for, and there are civic entities that are still intending to fundraise for them. That doesn't mean as they're fundraising that they don't shift their priorities on what they want to donate money for. But that is something that has been desired in this park because of how it's used to provide an amenity, a community-wide amenity with the other infrastructure in place to accommodate it. If you put in a splash pad, they will come. There will be a parking issue. You need to make sure you're putting it somewhere where there is ample parking available. This is kind of one of those elements. It's also nice when the older kids are playing some active ball sport and the younger kids can still utilize it while that's going on. But that's a community park, right? That's kind of asked on the previous agenda item. We're looking at another community park. We are going to be looking at future community parks, but this is the big one that you've been finishing out. It's intended to attract all visitor types and users of all ages, right? It's not intended just for a specific segment or demographic. So just highlighting a few things. A lot of infrastructure went in. No one sees the underground stuff, but nothing happens without. Again, updating of playground facilities. One of the things that came out of the last plan was we don't need a significant amount of new parks, and we'll touch on that a little bit, but it has been, let's complete parks that we do have. Let's make sure that we are consistently moving forward in those. Replacement of equipment as necessary, adding new equipment to serve different population segments has been important. Just to highlight some things, Rotary parks and pickleball courts, storage facility, batting cage, Industrial Drive, completed the off-street path. I mean, the connections are just as important as the parks themselves. Same up in Tyranena Park. Again, kind of staying on the high level. So if you have questions on something, please. Mr. Holman looks like he has a question.
Yeah, I just think that that's really important because with the amount of cost it takes to maintain, additional parks all the time, it's good that we're just, upgrading stuff we have, but I'm sure it has a big impact at the city staff level, just in park maintenance.
Yeah,
I mean,
we see that.
it's because it's everything. It's lawn mowing, it's trees, it's everything. So I'm glad to see that that's a real integral part of this upgrading the plan.
It is absolutely a priority of the Parks Board to make sure that we are completing elements of existing parks before we just start taking in large tracts of acreage, because if you haven't finished something, starting something else can.
I have one more question.
Yes, sir.
When there's new developments like this one we talked about tonight, is there a system for like fees in lieu of also so that we can use some of those monies to, you know what I mean? Like
We have
the same
always had
same
that
as
as a
kinda
part of.
consistent with like stormwater, where you can, do fees in lieu of and upgrade stormwater retention ponds. I just think that's.
It's consistent, though, with the stormwater in that if you're taking funds from that developer for a park, they need to be usable by that park or that development.
Oh.
So you're not gonna,
Oh, you
you're not
can't.
gonna put it into a neighborhood park on the north side of the city.
Oh.
If you, so it's not gonna be done
Not a
that way.
park
You're
fund.
actually gonna be looking at adding a park somewhere in that south side. You're gonna
Oh.
accumulate money and buy a park and
I see. But nevertheless, that's still better than.
Speaking to your last point, keeping and maintaining the current parks we have, we've seen that in the past few budget cycles where we keep adding more and more parks, but we're not adding any staff to the park department. So it's just making their job harder and harder to do to complete it and keep the parks running as they are.
And keep in mind, yours is not just a Parks and Recreation Department, it's also a Forestry Department.
Forestry
So
Department, yep.
They are always busy doing things. So, and if you've ever watched just what goes into maintaining Commons Park, I mean, that's a very significant park, but it's a lot of labor time to make, whether it's making sure they have ice or maintaining it for the summer events, right? It just takes a lot. I'll switch gears a little bit. Some of the background stuff is we do have demographic information in there. Again, we need to understand how have we been growing, how are we expecting to grow, and how much parkland do we have versus need to provide. The laws are kind of specific on what we have to have in there. We do have to have projections themselves. So we look at some of the historic things. This chart matrix is showing you kind of the historic growth and then projections associated with it. So you can kind of see in the end whether you're talking about if you use the 25-year trend for projections, the change has been an increase in population of nearly 50% since 2010. Going into 2035, as you get to a 15-year trend, it drops a little bit. If you use the 10-year trend, it spikes upward. DOA projections say 26.5%. The previous plan looked at the 15-year trend, which was a little over 1% or 1.25% growth annually. Our growth depends on so many different things that there is no silver bullet to this. We try to use a reasonable projection for growth to ensure that we are providing the acreage and facilities and programming that is needed for this important quality of life aspect of the community. I think when people think of Lake Mills, they think of the lakes and the parks and such. It is those quality of life issues. We want to make sure we're maintaining that as we move forward. But if you overestimate your population trends, you could be acquiring land that you're never going to use, right? You could be taking on too much. So we try to be very conservative in that. We are, instead of using some of the historic projections that we've seen in the past, 1990 to 2017 was about 1.25%. But 2010 to 2017 was a little more than 0.25% annually. And this is not a negative. It's just, let's be realistic about what we need as a community going forward. As we look back as plan commissioners, you can see that we have not had a litany of new platting, single-family platting that's been coming in, right? You certainly have residents coming in. We've had multifamily projects that have been approved, but your growth rate isn't in double digits, so we don't need to provide significant numbers of new acres for parklands. This plan is looking at a little over 0.25%. That would say that's a 6.5% growth as we look out 20 years. It's important to understand that for our long-range goals, but the kind of near term is the number of persons that we're really expecting to see around here. And again, we do update this plan every 5 years, so kind of in the 4-year period, we start to revisit these things. Keep an eye on the trends. Is there any questions about the growth rate stuff? I know this isn't real exciting. I just want to make sure we understand that this is helpful in the foundation of what recommendations come out of the plan. Some of the things that you're seeing here, your median age is going up, but it's still very young. So it's gone from generally 37 to 39. Reduction in the number of, or the percent of residents 15 to 24. I wouldn't be alarmed by that. That's, high school kids generally going off to college, right? But we have an increase in the number of residents under the age of 14 and the 25 to 34-year-olds. So you have young families, have kids, and you're getting maybe some of your kids who left for school or other reasons came back, and you're seeing, again, just young people coming back in. So that makes a difference in the type of programming that comes into your parks, right? Their needs. So again, we try to distill kind of read between the lines of some of the numbers to distill down to some understanding of how that impacts what we should be programming in a park. So how does all this translate into acreage? We use the NRPA standards. I don't know why they're the National Recreation and Park Association instead of the Park and Recreation Association, but it's the NRPA. And they conduct annual reviews of the communities across the country to help determine what some of those industry standards should be for programming and park sizes for communities, and especially like-sized communities. You can't compare Lake Mills to Milwaukee, right? Similarly, you can't compare, Lake Mills to something that's even 3 or 4 times your size, right? They have different needs. And they help us look at the type of programming you should have based on some of your demographics as well. So we use those metrics to see kind of what are the number of residents we should have per park and how that compares to kind of across the country. And then again, the number of acres per 1,000 residents or per capita. Generally the median for communities of less than 20,000 people, right? They've looked at 2,200 agencies that size, under 20,000 residents. The median is about 1,200 residents per park. The lower quartile is 788, which is better. You have 655 people per residents per park, which means it means you have a lot of park land for the number of residents you have, right? You're not fighting to get to the parks. There's plenty of park acreage for them to use. The other is how many acres per 1,000, that per capita. The median is 11.8, and you're at 13.4. Now, this is where it gets a little fuzzy. This is not like an absolute that you need to comply with. Some communities have more park acreage than others. That's just how it is. You are a community that was a lake, right, community. You were a resort type community when you started, and you had a historic downtown with a large square. And then over the years, you've ensured that you've had park acreage available. It has been a priority as I'll say a community of choice, right, where people choose to live, and where people want to live. This quality of life element is very important to your identity as a community. So you have more acreage. That's how it is. Now we start looking at by types of parks, and you see mini parks. Mini parks are generally less than a half acre in size. A number of years ago, the Parks and Rec Board and the park staff has said, we do not want to focus on having mini parks. That doesn't mean you don't have some parks that qualify for that, and it certainly doesn't mean you want to discourage those types of parks in the future. It has said that the city, because going back to they are more intensive to maintain, right? You still have to get there with equipment, you still have to buy equipment, you still have to maintain equipment, and you have to mow and all of those things. On a small park, that still eats up a lot of staff time to do so. A mini park generally doesn't have a lot of programming in it. It will have maybe a small playground for very small children and some unprogrammed green space, and then maybe some benches and a small picnic table and such. There may be developments that want to have mini parks within them, and the city's not going to discourage it, but they're also not going to make them public parks. They would be parks for those developments. Right? I think multifamily projects that would have that, maybe certain single-family projects may have that. Our focus has been on neighborhood parks and community parks. You have a fair amount of neighborhood parks, and it starts to skew your numbers, because you get to this kind of deficit surplus. It says, hey, we have a surplus of 18 acres per 1,000 people in neighborhood parks. But that's been the types of parks, the size of parks, and the programming of parks that you have developed in the past. You have one park that really qualifies as a community park. Commons Park is not necessarily a community park. Really, Wallace Park is your community park, as we talked about a little bit earlier. And now it says, hey, you have a significant deficit in community parks. Well, that's not necessarily the case. Again, this is kind of going off of those standards and the acreages per person and such. Your neighborhood park programming is more than sufficient to serve your parks. And each of your neighborhood parks, from Fayetteville to whatnot, all have kind of uniquely different programming. There's some overlapping, but they have some uniquely different programming to serve different needs of the community. Your community park seems though, because you only have a single park and you have a lot of activity in it. It says, boy, we better go out and get another community park. No, that's not the case because you do have active programming in your neighborhood parks as well. Whether it's ball fields, soccer fields, basketball, pickleball, whatever the case may be. So I don't want you to take that and say, oh my God, we are having a problem. Now, like, overall, again, total park acreage for your community, really only have a slight deficit in it. So does that make sense? What we're saying is, like, you don't need to go out and panic and say we better acquire another community park. It is something you should be mindful as you grow, but it isn't something that you have to rectify necessarily. The thing we complement this with is a geographic analysis. Right? I'm hoping you can see this. It's easier if you're pulling it up on your screen and such. Really, this is park service areas by park type. Community parks have a very large service area, right? So this, number 9, is Wallace Park, has a very large service area. They generally say a mile, but for a community your size, it's really the entire community. The neighborhood parks have that half-mile radius service area, and you can see that orange circle, lots of overlap in service area, especially where your residents are. Some special parks I'll qualify is Sandy Beach Park. It still functions community asked just because it's such a massive draw because of it being on the water. And then Commons Park, because it's a different kind of programming. And the Parks and Rec Board is very conscientious that Commons Park is not intended to have playground facilities and such in it. It is a community gathering space for that type of programming. There are many other parks where kind of the children activities are to occur. So you can see that you're well served, even though it says you're deficient in community parks. You really aren't, based on some of the special parks you have as well. But now we get into where do we need some new parks, right? As you grow, we have to look at some of the barriers to serving certain areas, right? The North Side Neighborhood Development Plan we've had on the books for 15 years, maybe. That's the area north of the interstate. You can say when residential development happens up there, and it's planned to in time, it's somewhat disconnected, right, from the rest of the community. We're going to need a park up there. We're going to need a neighborhood park up there to serve those residents. That doesn't mean that those residents can't come south of the interstate and vice versa, but it is impractical to expect children to have to traverse the interstate at the couple bridges that you have to get to a park facility. So that's one of the needs because of a geographic constraint. The others that we're seeing here is in the bottom, N2 and N3. Bisecting N2 and N3 is Main Street or 89. Again, significant physical barrier to being able to access parkland. And as we were talking about earlier, we show a park in the area, the general vicinity of the development that you just approved. The expectation is, yes, through that area, and that's a very large acreage area, not just that specific site, we're going to need a park down there. And as future development occurs down there, we're going to be mindful of ensuring we have a neighborhood park programmed there, ultimately. And then same as you go eastward across 89, there is a growth area that's expected, again, a long-term growth area within the community. And we're going to want a park down there. And as you continue to grow south, again, this is years down the road, but we do want to make sure that we are earmarking this, and this is on our long-range plans, is we do expect to have another community park down there. When, the next mile of land infills with development, there's going to be greater demands for active recreational spaces. So we know we're going to need a large community park, similar to Wallace Park, to serve the community as a whole, but you're going to think it's predominantly kind of the south side of the city. Not uncommon. Those are the big kind of new parks that we would expect. I think the ones that are most likely to see perhaps in the life of this plan would be N1 and N2, but it could be towards the tail end of that plan. Any questions on that? Other things that are shown here are, again, focus on connectivity. That is a key component of this plan, as well as making sure that we have connectivity. No questions on this map? Again, that's just, if someone wants to read about it, in case they don't have the description of me standing up here talking to them when they're reading it online, it's It's all there in the PowerPoint presentation. Again, continue to develop these parks. As you know, over the last couple of years, there has been a focus on the redevelopment of Sandy Beach Park. That is intended to continue. That was a very robust public feedback process to come up with that plan. And you're seeing the implementation of it now with the relocation of the boat launch. Again, that's kind of the first step. But again, continue to progress on those planned improvements. There is a new master plan for Commons Park that the Park Board approved. To better utilize that space for the activities that are programmed there, from the public market to the events in the gazebo, the music events and such, new pathways, new concessions, restroom facilities and such. Again, to complement all of the activities that are programmed in the downtown to make that a key recreation space for the community. And then, of course, trails and multimodal facilities. The last piece of this is this park impact fee and an update to that. Again, when you read through the plan, it'll tell you kind of what's expected in the development of a park, and then going back to the acreage needs for some of these parks that we have programmed. There are specific things that need to be in a park to make it a park. It's not just about having a piece of grass, right? It's playground equipment, it's bubblers, sorry, I'm a Milwaukeean, bubbler, water fountain, drinking fountain, an open air shelter, some picnic area, right? Different kinds of playground facilities and such. As new parks are developed, you'll still have a master plan for them, but there are specific items that we expect to be programmed in a park to make it usable. That gets brought into to developing this fee. There is also a dedication requirement. So you can either pay the fee, that's that fee in lieu of that was spoken of earlier. So fee in lieu of land dedication. And then there is a land dedication requirement that would say, based on the demographics and the park needs, 1,000 square feet of land per new dwelling unit that would come into the community would be dedicated. If they don't dedicate land, and again, that is at the discretion of the city, so the Parks Board, the Plan Commission, and the council, on whether or not it wants land in a development area that has been specified in this plan, those radii areas generally. If they say yes, they want land dedication, we work with the developer on making sure that that happens. If not, if they choose not to have land dedication, there's the fee that you would pay, fee in lieu of dedication. There's a slight increase overall in the price or the cost of the fee in lieu of dedication. It's also important to note that this fee in lieu of dedication is paid at the time of building permits. So this is the park impact fee. So there's a fee for land, and then there's a fee for improvement. We separate the two out because you could have someone that does dedicate land as part of development. They wouldn't pay a fee for the land. They still would pay a portion of fee for the improvements that would go into that park for them to use it. Much more detail in the document itself on this. That's what I had. Yes, sir.
I just have a question on that fees in lieu of thing.
Yes.
I was gonna bring that up from page 1. Back to Mr. Foster's point of these developments with a price point. You know, I know, what is that $1,000 per lot, based on what size lot, or what is?
It would be irregardless of size of lot.
Okay.
It would be for a lot and a home, and it happens when someone pulls a permit. Now, when we do calculate the fee, we do have to evaluate the impact on affordability, right? One of the issues that faces Lake Mills is your median home price is very high. New homes coming in are priced high. The $1,000 in the scheme of a $300,000 house is not an impediment to the development occurring. Now, that doesn't mean it's not a fee that has to be paid, but when it comes to what you're seeing right now for development, it's not an impediment. The new development out on the highway, the multifamily development, which is a series of 14-unit buildings and such, again, they pay a fee as well. They pay a park fee for a number of units. those are renting out faster than they can build them. I'm looking at Steve on that one. And that fee had to be paid by the developer, whoever built the building at that time, right, for all the units. But on a single-family home, when you pull the permit, then this is a part of your permitting fees that you pay to, towards.
I know it doesn't seem like a lot, but, you know, I just happen to be doing this right now, and it's, when there's 1,000 here and 1,000 there, pretty soon it's 10,000, you know what I mean? So it has to be
It's-
addressed a little bit.
It is only paid with new houses, and it's not paid with,
No, I understand.
on any home that's sold and,
No, no, I
an
understand.
existing
I
home.
understand how it's,
And again, it's, when someone's building a $300,000+ home lot package, $1,000 is not viewed as the impediment to it. That doesn't mean that the city can't have its own rules on how to handle impact fees for projects. But right now, all projects pay the impact fees. There's no waiver of them. And this document doesn't go into that. That is not its intention. Those would be, I'm looking at Steve on this, those would be council policy issues separate from, this would be the fee that would be required to have new residents in new homes pay their equitable share of the improvements necessary to serve them.
I understand that, but it does add up more than you could imagine. And I know I'm going to get backlash from this because I know everybody in every department, and they have to be funded. But when it comes to a developer trying to hit a price point, every time you put $1,000 on a building permit, it factors into that price point. I guess that's enough said. I mean, I could go on and on, but it's somehow we have to not just make that always open-ended, but yet I do know it has to be funded from something, and if it's not funded from impact fees, the mill rate will change. So, I mean, you have to get the money somewhere. I don't have an answer for it. I'm just making
I understand.
a comment based on experience in this particular case.
I understand. It is something, though, that is discussed in the impact fee portion of the update, the impact on
You know,
affordability.
we talked a little bit last night about the inequities of our state tax system, and if you want to really get into it deeply, there's so many inequities and things that are unjustifiable, but we have to figure out how to make it work, and I think that's where we're at here. If I could make it all perfect, it would be a different system, but we have to work with what we have, Steve, and
No, and I understand that even, like Mr. Foster said, understaffed departments, where's that money gonna come from? So I understand it has to come from somewhere. I don't have the answer, but all I know is an impact fee upon an impact fee adds up to a price point. And it just needs to be noted so that everybody's thinking about it as we do developments and think
As you
about
said,
everything.
You can choose to do no more park improvements, right? And just use general levy to fund your park department and your park facilities. But if you want to grow them and you want to make sure that it's equitable, that new resident, because without new residents, you wouldn't need new parks, in essence.
I know, I don't have the answer, but
There's no silver bullet.
thank you.
That's all I had for you tonight.
Okay, well, thank you, Mr. Wolf, and if you all saw his memo on the park plan, then, you know, I have to commend you. That memo is a fabulous executive summary
Wonderful.
of this park plan.
We recognize that it's not always easy to distill through a couple hundred pages that, Parks Board and the staff have been working on for a few months, right, to understand
yeah.
the details. So thank you for saying that. Also, let's make sure that everybody knows, there is a resolution in there, should you choose to decide to pass this tonight, that so then it could be sent on to the council in a public hearing at the council level.
All right, thank you, Mr. Wolf. Does anyone have questions of Mr. Wolf? All right, we do have a prepared motion, 22-3, recommendation to City Council, Comprehensive Outdoor Recreation Plan 2020 to 2025. This motion sets forth that the high-quality and well-managed public parks and recreational services are important facets of Lake Mill's image and character, as a livable small city, that the comprehensive outdoor recreation plan is in accordance with state statutes to plan for future public and recreation needs in the next 5 years, as well as over a longer time horizon. And also sets forth the assessment by the Parks Board and city staff, along with goals, objectives, and policies for 2020 to 2025, that the outdoor recreation plan is consistent with the city's comprehensive plan. And I would note that the resolution from the Parks Board is in here. So this motion does provide for a Plan Commission recommendation to the City Council for adoption of the Comprehensive Outdoor Recreational Plan 2020 to 2025, and for pursuing implementation of this plan as opportunities and resources allow. Either anyone wish to make a motion, or is there any further comments concerning the park plan that's been presented to us?
I'll make a motion to adopt motion 20-2-3.
Second.
Moved and seconded to pass motion 20-3. Any discussion?
I just wanted to say thank you for all the hard work that everybody has put into this. That was a very, very thorough document, and I think my favorite piece of it is the matrix in the appendix that lays out what's available at what park, and I think that's going to be very useful in the future for families that show up here in town, new families, things like that. That may even be a nice piece to put in on like a welcome aboard package I know we had talked about doing that in the past, and I don't remember where we left that at, but yeah, Parks Board, everybody that worked on this, amazing job.
Yeah, I would concur with that. It's moments like this that we appreciate our tablets rather than the paper that we used to receive in the past.
I really appreciate all the volunteer hours from the folks on the Parks Board, because
Absolutely.
Yes.
that's time they're taking away from their families, and that's a lot of work they did.
Yes, yes, it is. Planning Commissioners, there has been a motion and a second to pass motion 20-3. Is there any further discussion? In that case, I'll proceed with the roll call vote.
Ms. Lazarus?
Aye.
Mr. Foster?
Aye.
Mr. Holman?
Aye.
Mr. Schumacher?
Aye.
Mr. Coots?
Aye.
Motion passed 5-0.
Number 9 is recommendations for future agendas. Is there anything coming forward at this time?
There is. You will have 2 public hearings next month for TID 5 Amendment Number 1, which is at the southern end of the community, and for TID 8, which is the downtown area.
All right, very well. All right, thank you. All right, we are to item number 10, adjournment. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Moved and seconded to adjourn. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Anyone against? We are adjourned.